Welcome to our L Monitor. I'm Andrew Parasoliti, president of L Monitor, and our guest today is Stephen Kalin, foreign correspondent for the Wall Street Journal, based in Riyadh in the Gulf. Stephen has been covering the Middle East from the region since 2009. He moved to Riyadh in 2017 to cover the rise of Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and the profound social, economic, and political changes underway in the kingdom. He has reported on every major development in contemporary Saudi Arabia and its Gulf neighbors, and has also been reporting on Ukraine since Russia invaded Ukraine last year. A reminder that this is an L Monitor Pro event. While this one is free and open to the public, future events will be for Pro subscribers and members only. For those who would like to submit questions, please do so via the Q&A function on your Zoom screen. Stephen, welcome to this webinar. Let's get into it. You and your colleagues had a fantastic piece in the Wall Street Journal this month on the Saudi Public Investment Fund, including reports of some friction between fund managers and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman over certain strategic investment decisions. The PIF was in the news again this week at the Elon Musk's trial, where Musk said that the fund was in fact key or was expected to help take Tesla private in 2018. Tell us a little about the Public Investment Fund, its background, and its role in the Crown Prince's investment strategy, and some of the frictions that you reported on.
Sure, Andrew. Well, thanks for having me. It's great to be with you, and thanks to the whole L Monitor team for setting this up. Yeah, we had a report that came out about 3 weeks ago, which was the culmination of months of reporting in Saudi on the Public Investment Fund, which has really become, I mean, it's been around for decades, but really became what was sort of reinvented under the Crown Prince. Back in 2015, 16, as the main engine of Vision 2030, of these economic reform initiatives. And so it's grown exponentially over those years. And the reporting that we uncovered, myself and a few colleagues here in the Gulf, was, told the story about sort of a sleepy old, pretty boring institution for many decades that, like a pension fund, managed Saudi assets, most overwhelmingly domestic assets, very passively, making a very modest conservative return. And when the Crown Prince rose to power, he saw this as an opportunity to really drive some of the economic initiatives that the vision envisions, creating new economic sectors unrelated to oil, to bridge Saudi Arabia from the oil era to the post-oil era. And so in doing so, it's sort of become, even though it's a bit older, it has a bit of a startup kind of mentality. He appointed Yasser Rumayyan, who is a Saudi banker, was pretty well known domestically in Saudi, wasn't very well known internationally before he took this role, to really guide the institution. And our reporting revealed that the two of them have a pretty strong influence on a lot of the investment decisions and the nature of how PIF has developed. And focus to a more balanced mix of domestic and international investment. So we've seen, obviously, you mentioned the Elon Musk trial. There was talk a few years ago. Obviously, this trial all goes back to Elon's famous famous tweet about having funding secured for taking Tesla private back in, I think it was 2018, and that's based on conversations that he had, in which he claims that the Saudis assured him of financial backing for doing that. Obviously, the Saudis also they've taken a big stake in Lucid, which is one of the main competitors to Tesla, and in doing so, they've managed to get Lucid to agree to set up a domestic manufacturing plant. Basically, they set the first plant outside of the U.S. for Lucid for EVs in Saudi Arabia, and that was another strand of reporting that came through in our story this month, which is the sort of the multifaceted nature of PIF. It, unlike many other sovereign wealth funds, which tend to be quite conservative and to sort of take a country's resource wealth and lock it away in interest earning accounts or relatively low risk investments, maybe sort of matching the stock index. The PIF really is a bit of, I mean, it's doing that. It's investing in the Saudi stock market. It is investing in overseas markets. It's sort of as a direct investor, but then it's taking direct stakes also in companies like Lucid, like Uber, Magic Leap, lots of big names. And of course, there's also the Newcastle investment. They're investing in sports. They're helping set up the Live Golf League, which is sort of this startup rival to the PGA Tour. So they have these big international initiatives, but then they're also investing quite a lot in building domestic industries. And one very interesting model that they're pursuing these days is sort of what they're doing with Lucid, which is take a direct stake in a large stake in an international company, and then use that position. They have a representation on the board and a hand in decision making, and then get those companies to then invest back in the Saudi economy directly, help create jobs and create new sectors in Saudi Arabia. And so that's a very ambitious goal, obviously, and one that is fraught with risks and challenges, but one that they're continuing to pursue. They're doing that in various other fields like mining, which is something else we can talk about today.
Stephen, there was a dust up back in October. You sure? Stephen, there was a dust up back in October over OPEC Plus's decision to reduce production. The Biden administration at that time had called for a review of U.S.-Saudi relations, given what happened in oil markets subsequently. That may have been an overreaction. And it seems like the review is on hold, and the relationship between the United States and Saudi Arabia, especially the security relationship, is more or less stabilized. You and your colleagues have written about this in recent weeks. Tell us where the U.S.-Saudi relationship stands now, and what's the new normal in relations between Washington and Riyadh?
Yeah, that's right. I think we were all a bit surprised, that the Saudis have expressed astonishment at the White House's reaction to the OPEC Plus decision to cut oil production back in October. I was surprised at how quickly things went from, sort of potentially turning the corner on a pretty tumultuous year and a half of relations when President Biden came to Jeddah back in July. It seemed to be an important moment. There were a number of meetings. Obviously, he met with the King and the Crown Prince and attended the summit. And even though there were still tensions around human rights and Jamal Khashoggi, even at that in that trip itself, it seemed like we were turning the corner. And so a lot of us were surprised at how quickly things went from tentatively improving to sort of a new rupture back in October. And President Biden, obviously, the White House came out with pretty strong statements and framed all of this in the context of the Ukraine war. And that sort of promised that there would be consequences again, and there would be another review of the relationship, and but sort of kicked the can down the road by saying, well, I'm going to consult with Congress. It's going to be after the midterm elections. And so the elections came and went. The president's party did a little bit better in the elections than I think most people were expecting. That combined with the drop in oil prices, the continued sort of drop in oil prices throughout the second half of last year, as you mentioned, I think took some of the steam out of that, out of those tensions. And as you rightly pointed out, we reported about the ongoing security relationships that really kind of carried this this relationship through this stormy period, and historically, I think that's often carried the day, and that's what we see again. I mean, our reporting has shown that the U.S.'s focus on and its partners and allies' focus on countering Iran has really been a sort of a galvanizing force, and has been able to, in some ways, pull the relationship back from another rupture point. As far as we can tell at the moment, this sort of new second review of the relationship from the White House seems to be on hold or not going forward. I would say that the sort of new normal for the relationship seems to be continued uncertainty, and I still think that both sides are often misunderstanding or sort of talking past each other, and that unfortunately seems like I don't see many indications that that's changing anytime soon. I think one important thing to note is that while things may not have gotten worse since that October moment, there have not been a lot of high-level visits, sort of even some of the regular contacts that diplomatic contacts. I think the military and security ones continue, and there are perhaps a couple of phone calls back and forth, but even just sort of day to day, I think that the relationship is still in an awkward moment, and it's going forward this year. I think it's far from clear exactly. I think it's far from clear, and that this is back to business as usual. I think the Saudis have expressed that they still want this relationship to work. It will probably need to work in a different way than it has in the past, and I think that's true for both sides, because Saudi Arabia is changing and the region is changing, and what the U.S. wants out of the region and how it wants to engage is changing. And so what I have yet to see so far, and this may be happening behind closed doors, but will be really interesting to know is how the new kind of U.S.-Saudi relationship going forward is going to be conceived, because obviously for the last few decades, it's come under this aegis of the Carter Doctrine. That's been kind of the abiding ethos, and I'm not sure that that's really fit for purpose going forward for both parties. It'll be interesting to see if there can be sort of a big think on how that might be reworked to serve both sides better.
Stephen, you covered the summit in Riyadh when China's President Xi was there last month. How does Saudi Arabia view its relationships with China? What are its expectations regarding that relationship? And how does it balance its ties between the US and China, given that China is the focus of US national security strategy?
Yeah, it's a really fascinating relationship, and one that is pretty young, especially compared to the US relationship. It has largely been focused until just a few years ago on energy. China being the top buyer of Saudi oil and top trading partner for Saudi Arabia. It's a critical relationship, critical economic relationship, especially as the kingdom looks to build new economic sectors. And has faced an uphill battle convincing Western companies to invest in the kingdom. I think we've seen Chinese companies step up more, and so that energy relationship has expanded into and it's continuing to expand into a broader economic relationship in which the Chinese are, while Saudi is definitely a different market than many of the African countries where China has a large presence, there's still a strong opportunity for Chinese companies to be involved in Saudi, and we see a lot of that with the mega projects, the giga projects that the Saudi is undertaking, whether that's Chinese construction companies, also technology, AI, smart city focused companies that are sort of jumping in and helping out. And then of course the relationship has the possibility to broaden out from that even further. I don't think we've gotten to that point, but obviously the tensions with the Americans have to do with that aspects of those relationships reaching such a point where they kind of brush up against key U.S. interests in Saudi Arabia and in the Middle East. And so we hear a lot about red lines around technology, telecommunications, which could, potentially affect the ability of the U.S., especially the military, but also U.S. companies to comfortably do business in Saudi Arabia, adjacent to Chinese companies. And so I think that summit, obviously there was a lot of symbolism around the summit. It wasn't just a bilateral meeting. There was also the GCC, China and the Arab China summits. And there was, of course, some inevitable comparisons to President Biden's visit back in July, in which there was a lot of, there was a fist bump versus a warmer handshake. A lot of people made stuff about that, but I think the sense that I got was there were a lot of MOUs signed. There was not a lot of talk about, at least in public, about any security or military dimensions to the relationship, which I think are the big U.S. fears. And so, the Saudi foreign minister, when asked about that, said publicly in the press conference afterwards that there was no discussion about sort of military deals or armament. I think that's the sort of thing that would have been a red flag. But there was, of course, some talk about cooperation on civil nuclear engagement, the possibility of conducting some trade between China and Gulf countries in the yuan, and so they're sort of pushing up against some of the potential friction points with the U.S., but I don't think they really crossed any of those lines last month.
A reminder to our viewers, we're already getting a number of questions. If you'd like to submit a question for Stephen Kalin, please do so via the Q&A function on your Zoom screen. Stephen, related question on U.S.-Saudi relationship. There was a bit of a stir in the press this week over excerpts from Mike Pompeo's new book, Never Give an Inch, where he returned to the issue of the killing of Jamal Khashoggi. Biden and his July visit, which you've already talked about, seemed to want to move beyond that issue, but now it seems back in the news. How has that reporting been covered there in the kingdom, if it's been covered much at all?
Yeah, I think the Khashoggi issue has obviously been a defining issue for the past 5 years in Saudi Arabia for the Crown Prince. Last year was a pretty important time, I think, for him in terms of after COVID. This was the first time he traveled to Europe last summer. He received the leaders of not just President Biden, but the leaders of France and the UK as well in the past year. And so that's there's sort of this sense of returning to the world stage. Sort of, people talk about the rehabilitation, the international rehabilitation of the Crown Prince, and whether the world is getting, and the Western governments, companies, which many have been still hesitant to get involved with Saudi, to invest in Saudi because of the reputational risks largely connected to that incident. And so President Biden's visit was, obviously his position on Saudi Arabia had a lot to do with Khashoggi, but also other human rights issues. And so in many ways, it was seen, I think, as a way to not to put that sort of to rest, but to allow the relationship to continue. And in some ways it did that, but in some ways it also kept it alive, because the president, after his meeting with the crown prince, came out and immediately said, I told him that I thought you were responsible, and sort of in his house said, brought it up and made it an issue again. And so it sort of wasn't resolved at the end of that trip. And now to have the former Secretary of State, who is actually the first, he was on a plane within 2 weeks of the Khashoggi murder back in Riyadh, meeting with the crown prince back in 2018. And that was in this period before the Saudis had even acknowledged that Saudi government officials were responsible for this crime. And so to have this then come up, I think, at the beginning, basically we're looking into the start of the 2024 presidential campaign, which Pompeo is considered obviously a potential candidate. It really just sort of, I think, highlights how this issue remains, the Khashoggi issue in the Saudi relationship, and the Saudi relationship more generally, remains very divisive. I think in some ways, I would imagine that the Saudis would, they had a strong relationship with many officials in the Trump administration, and I'm sure they appreciate the confidence and the support of those officials now that they're out of office. But I wonder how much keeping this in the sort of front and center actually might continue to complicate U.S.-Saudi relationships. And I think that's one of these themes I think we'll continue to see this year, is that the U.S.-Saudi relationship has for a long time and will continue to be a part of U.S. partisan politics, and I think increasingly, U.S. electoral politics. And as we go into this campaign cycle, I think that's going to be kind of another key factor to keep in mind in the broader diplomatic relationship, which until now has been sort of dominated by the Biden White House and their sort of campaign promises and their approach to the Middle East.
Stephen, two questions centering on Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. One is, you've been covering the economic, social, and political transformation of the kingdom since he became Crown Prince. If you could comment on how you see the progress of those changes and his role in pushing those changes within the kingdom, because he's faced some resistance. And do you expect a smooth succession when King Salman steps down as king? And when do you think that might happen?
Yeah, I mean, when I first came to the kingdom in 2017, we were regularly hearing rumors that the king might step down, the king might remain king, but appoint the crown prince as prime minister. That obviously happened last year, and it seems to me that at this point it's unlikely for him to step down. The crown prince is prime minister. Which is sort of an acknowledgement of his the sort of day-to-day authorities that he's had for several years. And the king's health is obviously a question that people are always sort of trying to read the tea leaves on. I'm not going to speculate about that, but it's possible that I don't see any indication. Obviously, I've been there since the crown prince replaced his cousin Mohammed bin Nayef as crown prince, and then jailed people in the Ritz-Carlton roundup, including Prince Mitab, who is also seen as a potential contender. So there's really not been for a long time, I think, any obvious threat to him as to his position. And I think that's that there's succession is a delicate moment, but I think there's been a lot of thought and preparation that's gone into that. To the broader point about the reforms, I think the reforms have moved. Some have moved rapidly, and the Saudis have already surpassed their 2030 targets in some ways. One very interesting point is the participation of women in the workplace, which I think is around 37% at the moment. It was the 2030 target was, I think, 35, and so they surpassed that last year, I believe. We're now halfway through. The vision was launched in 2016. It's a 14-year vision. We're 7 years through, which is pretty remarkable. I don't think on most metrics, I haven't done a full analysis, but I don't think they're halfway to all of their goal, halfway or more to all of their goals. But I also think it's not sort of a directly progressive motion. I think there are some things that happen very quickly, like women's participation. A lot of the women driving was announced and happened a few months later, and within a year or two, it became so normal that I don't even think about it anymore. The first 6 months, whenever you saw a woman driving, it was still a novelty, and then after that, it just became so normal. So these different changes happen at different paces, and I think the approach that I've also seen seems to be that when there's an effort to move on basically all of these various initiatives, economic and social changes, when progress happens quickly, there's often an acceleration of those efforts, and so things move faster and faster. When there is resistance, there is often sort of a pause, reevaluation. What's the obstacle? How can it be removed or handled? And then either sort of come back to it a few months later or a few years later, after trying to massage the different challenges there. And so I think that's why we've seen especially on some of the economic reforms. I mean, there was a lot of progress, for example, on financial consolidation. I think that worked really well. The kingdom's financial sector has been one of its most developed even before the vision. So it makes sense that when they pushed in that direction, they moved very quickly, and they just continued to do that. On other reforms like building the industrial sector and manufacturing, this is something that Saudi's tried to do for a while, has struggled to do, and so we've seen various launches of different strategies, and sort of relaunches almost of very similar strategies, even during the past 7 years, and I think that's partly a reflection of there needing to be more sort of groundwork done. So in the next 7 years, I don't think it's going to be, especially in the economic side, it may not be linear. Again, there may be certain sectors where that witness tremendous progress faster than expected, and there may be others that continue to lag. And it's hard exactly to say. I mean, I think a lot of those have to do with internal bureaucracies that they're looking to reform, and codification of different laws. It also has a lot to do with international markets and what else is happening in the world. I think COVID obviously was a setback in some ways for Saudi, but also an opportunity to reset and reassess and strike out on a slightly adjusted path. I think the vision is still largely what it was when it was launched. But it's given them this opportunity, and we've really seen in the past year a return to the sort of late 2019 energy, excitement, and speed of activity in the kingdom.
Stephen, our time is short, but we have a number of questions from viewers. I'd like to get to as many of them as we can in the next few minutes. Prime Minister Netanyahu has said one of his priorities is to normalize relations with Saudi Arabia. The Saudi foreign minister at Davos this month said that's only going to happen when there's a Palestinian state. We see today in the news, flare up of violence again in the West Bank. How do you see the issue of normalization progressing, especially as things look pretty grim on the Israeli-Palestinian front?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, the Saudis have a pretty consistent message on this, which is that they're open to normalization. They've always been open to normalization, but it's not without conditions. And I think that the devil is really in the details on how that gets worked out. Does there need to be a full Palestinian state? Does it need to be? Can it be something short of that? Can there be steps towards normalization that enable the Saudis to take advantage of some of the what they perceive as benefits of having a partnership with Israel, whether that be security ties and cooperation, business ties and mutual investments. Both countries are working on a lot of similar fields around desalination, trying to green the desert, manufacturing, technology. And so I think Riyadh sees a lot of opportunity there, but it also sees, of course, a lot of risks inherent in its status as custodian of the two holy mosques, and both domestically and internationally. It carries risks to do this, and I think the Saudis are keen to see progress on the Palestinian issue, and there's also I think my reading of the Israeli side of this is that a lot of it has to do with the domestic politics there, whether trying to hold that coalition together, and also trying to get progress on this before there is a flare up, as unfortunately we've started to see. That just makes things more complicated on the Saudi front.
Stephen, how do you see the evolution of the progress on the NEOM mega project in the kingdom? This has obviously been high priority for the Crown Prince. What's been the reaction from international investors, and how do you see that developing over the next few years?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't been up there recently, but the Saudis have released videos and satellite images showing the start of construction work on the line, and some of the other projects. Remarkably, they've secured the hosting rights for I think it's the Asian Winter Games in 2029 in this one sort of area of NEOM called Trojena, which has a mountain that has snowfall for part of the year, but obviously Saudi is a warm desert country, and so that's just, to me, a remarkable target that they're going to have to hit, or face quite negative attention for winning these rights and then not being able to host them. So I think there's a lot of effort going into that. I think there's a lot of domestically, there's a lot of money and energy and focus on it. There are some international companies that obviously have gotten a lot of contracts to help with the construction and the planning, and there's lots of consultants, both Saudi and foreigners, who are up there and working on it from Riyadh. There's a couple of I think pretty substantial investments, like Air Products getting involved in a green hydrogen plant. That's the one that sort of sticks out to me as, I think, one of the larger ticket items. I think there remains, from my conversations with Western companies, a skepticism and a hesitancy around NEOM, and in a sense also just, I think it sort of in many ways embodies the ethos of the larger vision, which is we may not get all the way there in the time frame that we set out, but we are making progress in that direction. So it's more of a direction of travel than a firm commitment to this is exactly what this will look like on this date. And I think there's been an evolution of thinking on that. I think it's, as we've reported, some of the big challenges that they face, both kind of structurally and culturally, in getting this off the ground. But I think it was launched in 2017. It's now been about 5 years through, and we're seeing workers up there in progress. And so I think we'll definitely see something in the next few years. There will definitely be people living there. I think a lot remains open as to what exactly it will look like, who it attracts in terms of residents and companies and real activity. But it's definitely taking up a lot of the bandwidth, I think, in Riyadh. So it's definitely not something that's been forgotten. That's for sure.
Stephen, we have a comment and question from the communications advisor to the U.S. Special Envoy for Yemen, who thanks you for this conversation and your reporting on the region. Just wanted to acknowledge an important fact that there haven't been many U.S. visitors to Saudi Arabia. She's just noting that the Special Envoy and his team travel there quite frequently, and engagements with Saudi Arabia on Yemen and the Yemen file are ongoing. Could you comment more broadly about what's U.S.-Saudi collaboration on Yemen and ending the war there?
Yeah, that's a great point, and appreciate the correction. I think Tim has been probably out to Saudi more than any other official I can think of. Although I won't say that to and be corrected again. But yeah, I think he was. That's true. He was there, I think, just a few weeks ago, and then a couple of months before that. And I think that has been one of the relative bright spots of a very tense U.S.-Saudi relationship, has been this truce that was agreed back in, I think it was April or May of last year, just around the start of Ramadan. And that expired after a few months ago, but has largely still held sort of in de facto terms. And of course, we're now seeing direct Saudi Houthi talks, occasionally moderated by or mediated by the Omanis, with encouragement from the UN and the U.S. Special Envoy, the White House, and I think a lot of sort of cautious optimism around progress on Yemen. There's obviously still a lot of hardship. There have not been very many at all sort of Houthi attacks, cross-border attacks into Saudi Arabia, or coalition airstrikes into Yemen. There may have been there are reports of scattered incidents here and there, but over the past 9 months, it's the toll has really dropped, and so that's a bright spot and one to be appreciated and applauded. I think the bigger question of how this conflict ends, how Saudi and the coalition's involvement ends, but then also the resultant conflict in Yemen and the hardship and the difficulty, especially for there's been a lot of reports of the abuses in Houthi-controlled areas, and that unfortunately will continue, I think. So and then there's a whole conversation about the redevelopment of the country that's been at war for so many years. But yeah.
Stephen, you've reported this month on the Saudi investment and interest in mining, which the kingdom sees as a booming industry. I'd also highlight an El Monitor Pro memo recently by our colleague Afshin Malavi on the copper mining industry that goes into some detail on this, as your report did as well. Tell us how the Saudis see mining and how you see that sector as potential for investment and growth in the coming year.
Yeah, this mining conference a couple of weeks ago was really interesting, and it attracted a very high level sort of collection of visitors, especially top executives from top mining companies around the world, from the US, Australia, elsewhere. And the Saudis signed a few deals. There were some investments into Saudi, largely around exploration and mapping the mineral resources and what basically is there under the ground, because the Saudis estimate, based on earlier studies, that they have deposits that are worth over $1 trillion. And now the question is, how accurate that is, how easy it is to access them, how valuable they actually are. And so I see this as a sector that has potential. There haven't been huge investments by many of the top mining companies, but there is interest in seeing this through. And this to me seems like one of the this, of course, an outgrowth of the vision strategy to diversify the economy. Saudi has been taking oil out of the ground and selling it for decades very successfully. Mining is a very different type of extraction, but I think there is an inherent logic in moving into that sector, in which the kingdom does have, and they have been mining in Saudi for a while, just not for many years, just not at huge industry-wide levels. So I see this as one of those sectors I was talking about earlier, that they've been talking about it for 7 years, for longer actually. They had to do a lot of, they tried to get investors to come. There were obstacles. They issued a new mining investment law, I think it was 2 years ago. That's now come into practice. That was done in coordination and consultation with a lot of the international mining companies, who have largely expressed satisfaction with the direction that Saudi is moving. And so we could see pretty good progress on that in the coming years. Of course, mining by nature generally is a very long-term industry, and so requires confidence in the rule of law and in the direction of travel of the country. But mining companies operate in plenty riskier environments than Saudi Arabia. So I can see this kind of going on as sort of a slow burn, and but that in 10 or 20 years we might be talking about the success story of the mining industry in Saudi. It won't carry the country by itself, but I think it's one of those sort of component building blocks of the new economy that the Saudis are trying to build.
We've gone over time. I'm not surprised, given the rich conversation we've had with Stephen Kalin. I feel like we're just getting started. Thank you. And thank you for your reporting, your analysis today. Your columns and reporting are required reading in the Wall Street Journal on what's happening in the kingdom and the Gulf. And I'd like to thank all those viewing today. Please continue to tune in to El Monitor to cover all the news and trends, and El Monitor Pro to be involved in events like this in the future, and for the deep dive analysis that we do in memos on the Saudi mining industry and other economic and business developments in the region. Thank you all very much for your time, your attention, and your participation. Look forward to seeing you again soon.